What's up, guys? Let's take a look at another CodeWars exercise. This one's a very easy one. It's a level 8 and it's asking whether a number's even or odd, but I wanted to do an easy one and I wanted to do it in another language. So this is Rust. Rust is a wonderful language. A lot of people like it because it has good error messages. It'll tell you what you got wrong and what you probably meant. A lot nicer than others, including Python. So let's give it a try. We might get it on the first go and not have to worry about errors, but we'll see. This says create a function that takes an integer and returns even or odd. All right. So a function in Rust looks pretty reasonable. It uses the syntax fn, and then we give it a name, and then we have the parentheses with some parameters. The only difference is you determine the type. So in Python we can just say number, and who knows what it could be. We could give a string to that function, but in this language we say i32, which is a 32-bit integer. And then there's the return type as well, which is what it's going to return. So instead of hoping that it returns a string, now we are going to declare that, hey, this is supposed to return a string. And then we put our line, or maybe a couple lines, in this spot. So one thing we could do is if else, right? We could say if it's even, we do one thing. If it's odd, we do another thing, right? And I'm going to use the % operator, which is not exactly the same as in Python, but it's close. So this is the idea of modulo 2 is something evenly divisible by 2, or does it have a remainder? Now, we're going to see that this doesn't quite work because Python and Rust handle negatives differently. But let's give it a try. Let's say if number modulo 2 is 1, then I'm going to go odd. Okay? Now you'll see curly brackets. Rust uses curly brackets to determine a new block instead of indenting. But you know what? Let's indent too. Why not? And then I could say else even. And one thing that I really like is you don't have to say return. If you have a block and it's just an expression and that's the end of the function, well, we're going to return it. You don't have to type the word return, although you could. It's totally fine either way. So let's try this, see if maybe I made a mistake or maybe we're good. Hey, look at that. It says we got one wrong, but if you'll notice, that's the last one. Okay, so when we tested 0, that was fine. When we tested 2, that was fine. When we tested 1, that was fine. But the last one is a negative number. And so that's an interesting quirk that the modulus in Python and the same looking operator with the % in Rust do different things when you come to negative numbers. So for example, if I say like 2 or negative 1 modulo 2, does that give us 1? Does it give us negative 1? How does it count? Well, I could get into all the details, or I could say, well, hey, you know what? The 0 is still 0. Like if I do a negative 2 modulo negative 2, that's fine, whatever. So what if we just switch them and we don't even worry about the details? Let's try that. Hey, that one worked. Okay, so sometimes you can get into, how does this work and what do they return when we do a negative? Or you could just say, well, you know what? Let's make it the else. The else is the thing I don't have to care about. Okay, and since this is a really tiny block here, you could almost cram it into one line. Let's see how that looks. Well, I said block. It's really a couple blocks because of the different branches. But that looks fine, I think, if we put it in one line, and it will work. It's kind of like the expression in Python where you can say return even if number modulo 2 is 0, else odd. However, this is not the common way to do it in Rust. The common way to do things in Rust that would normally be if-else is something they call pattern matching. So you say the word match, and then you give different branches, different outcomes that almost look like a dictionary, where it's like, hey, this thing goes to this thing, this thing goes to this thing. And it offers some really powerful possibilities, which we're not going to see here because we're just looking at two things. But let me show you what we have in mind. So what you say is match, and then the expression. And then you say, I think some curly brackets, if number modulo 2 is 0, then we go even. And if it's anything else, which is represented by an underscore, we go odd. Okay? So let me see if that works. I may have misremembered the syntax, but it's something like this. Hey, that works too. And guess what? Python has a match statement as well. It's pretty new, and you won't see it on our CodeWars lessons or anything like that. But Python and Rust get a lot of inspiration from each other, and some of the cool stuff in Rust are ideas that came from Python. For example, it has the if-else thing that I was talking about, whereas most other languages would use a ternary operator with like a question mark and a colon, a whole different look. Now, we'll get to some match statements in Python where you can go a little deeper and say, okay, if we're in this branch, what happens after that? And if we're in this other branch, what happens after that? But for now, it's just nice to introduce it, and I thought it would be helpful to see it in another language, and so we don't just get stuck on the Python rules about why do they put an indent or why do they put a colon or whatever. Let's quickly look at the solutions from other people and see if they have any cool ideas. This one looks just like ours. The parameter is a different name. I don't know if they changed it or maybe it's an old version of the question, but it's the same idea. We match on that modulo 2, and we say if it's 0, we return even. If it's not, we return odd. You'll see they put a comma on the last one, and I didn't. And it's fine either way, but I really understand why. Because you know what happens, right? Is you're going to add another one, and then it doesn't work because you forgot to put the comma. So it's always nice to have a comma on the last thing, just like what happens with Python dictionaries, because if you add another one, well, you're going to forget. And this person squished it into one line with that if-else. It kind of looks like one single expression, but in a way it's not because it has these different blocks. The implicit return, the thing where you just return on a block at the end without actually saying return, it kind of blurs the line between a statement and an expression. It feels like you can really say what you want to say without worrying about semicolons or whatever. Which, by the way, Rust uses semicolons at the end of statements, but we didn't even have to worry about it here because we were getting it all done in one. That's an interesting variation. This person tested whether it's equal to 0, and then they have true and false in their match cases instead of 0 and the underscore placeholder kind of else version. This one is we're indexing into this, I don't know if that'd be a tuple or a list, but we've got even and odd, and then the index, are we going 0 or 1, they're just using the modulo. they are using bit. They're looking at the bits to see if like the last bit is a 1 or a 0. That's another way to test for evenness. And we're going to see the same stuff. These guys said return, even though you don't have to. Works either way. So I thought that was nice to get a little taste of another language, especially one that is new and nice and people like it. And one of the reasons people like it is because the syntax is nice and they've taken some ideas from not just Python, but Haskell and Ruby and other languages that are known for having just things that are nice to deal with. Rust is also known for speed and memory safety and some low-level hardcore things, but it's not meant to be ugly the way some other languages are when you have to deal with that.